Hi, and welcome back. This is session 5 of our series on Acts of the Apostles. As I closed out last time, I asked you to take a look at the story about Philip and the eunuch, the one story that we did not get to last week. And I asked you to consider the question of why was this story put there in that place at that time by the author. Now, Luke, as guided by the Holy Spirit, has a specific reason for putting that story in there. The first thing he's done is to show us how the Spirit has shown the apostles and the disciples that the gospel is not just for the Jews there in Jerusalem, and yet it hadn't been sent out to anyone yet until this moment. And so he begins the story by showing us how, with the persecution of the church beginning, with the death of Stephen, that Philip goes to Samaria, the half-Jews. And he goes to a man, a eunuch, who is, according to Deuteronomy 18, not even allowed to go into the temple. A man who has been physically altered so that he is not really considered a full-blooded man. So we have these unclean characters that are already offered the gospel, and the story there closes like this in verse 38 of that chapter. It says, "And he ordered the chariot to stop, and they both went down into the water, Philip as well as the eunuch, and he baptized him. And when they came up out of the water, the Spirit of the Lord snatched Philip away." So that's an interesting word there. It means exactly what it sounds like. He was pulled away. He was taken away as if by force. He was taken away. You can theorize about what that means, but your guess is as good as mine. It pretty much is what it sounds like. He was no longer seen by the eunuch, it says. And the eunuch went on his way rejoicing. Verse 40. But Philip found himself at Azotus, and as he passed through, he kept preaching the gospel to all the cities till he came to Caesarea. So if you look at the map here, Philip, having been drawn down to this road where he met the eunuch, has been working through the territory between Azotus and Caesarea. And it says he's preaching the gospel to all the cities until he came to Caesarea. Now, interestingly, we don't yet know to whom he is preaching. We'll talk about that in just a minute. But for now, the story rolls over to another character that we're going to consider, and his name is Saul. And I also want you to keep in mind that throughout this book, the book of Acts, Jesus is alive and working. We're going to see that in a very powerful way during this story. Now, Saul, as we know from Philippians chapter 3 in verse 5, was a Hebrew of the tribe of Benjamin. He was native of Tarsus, which was the third most important center of learning in the then known world, surpassed at that time only by Athens and Alexandria. He was born a Roman citizen, according to his own reckoning in Acts 22, from an influential family. As such, he would have both Jewish and Greek and Roman background. He belonged to a party of the Pharisees, which meant that he knew Greek and Roman culture, but he was wholeheartedly committed to the defense of the Jewish religion and serving the God of Israel by strict adherence to the law. He was right in his zeal to try to defend the religion of the Jews from what he thought of as a blasphemer. So, he had evidently determined to destroy the church, chapter 9 verse 1 says, and having crushed the rebellion there in Jerusalem and sent them scattering all over the area, he decides to then pursue them north to Damascus, where he hears there have been some people that have been persuaded by this blasphemer. Now, the story of Paul's conversion is a fascinating one. We won't go through all the details of that, but the story goes something like this. Saul, on his way to Damascus with letters in his hands from the high priest and some companions with him, is blinded by a light. His companions can hear something, but they can't tell it's a voice. Saul very clearly hears the Lord, Jesus, speaking to him. He says, "Why are you persecuting me?" And Saul says, quite honestly, I think, and maybe very confused, "Who are you?" "I'm Jesus, whom you're persecuting." Jesus here is one of those instances where he appears alive and well. He appears to Saul. Remember, one of the stipulations for being an apostle was that you had seen the Lord. Saul would not have qualified to be an apostle had he not seen the risen Lord. So his conversion story here, when he finds out that Jesus is really the Son of God, is fascinating. The story is told 3 times. It's told once here by Luke, and then Paul himself recounts it twice, as recorded by Luke in Acts 22, and then again in chapter 26. And he adds a few little details to it, but they don't really change the story much about what really happened. Suffice it to say that it was a real vision. It wasn't a dream. He actually saw, as in vision, he saw Jesus. Jesus actually appears, and Saul was actually blinded. His traveling companions, like I said, they heard the voice, but from that moment on, he served Jesus, the Christ. Now, I think it would be really very telling if we could, for a moment, stop the tape and discuss the question that we have listed there. Take your time and come back when you're through. So, Saul has been confronted by the risen Jesus. He's changed his ideas about what the church is, and he begins immediately to preach. The reading picks up here. It says, "Now for several days, he," meaning Saul, "was with the disciples who were at Damascus, and immediately he began to proclaim Jesus in the synagogues, saying, 'He is the Son of God.' And all those hearing him continued to be amazed and were saying, 'Is not this he who in Jerusalem destroyed those who called on the name, and who had come here for the purpose of bringing them bound before the chief priests?'" So they knew all about him. They knew what his mission was. They knew where his heart was. But Saul kept increasing in strength and confounding the Jews who lived in Damascus by proving that Jesus is the Christ. Now, what do you do when you can't offer a good counter-argument to an argument that is being made? Well, if you're unethical, you try to destroy the messenger. You tell lies about them, you make things up so that their message can't get across. Verse 23, "When many days had elapsed, the Jews plotted together to do away with him." But their plot became known to Saul. They were also watching the gates day and night so that they might put him to death. But his disciples took him by night and let him down through an opening in the wall, lowering him in a large basket. So Saul, having been converted in Damascus and having traveled back to Jerusalem, tries to associate with the disciples around him. But they were afraid of him, not believing that he was truly a disciple. But Barnabas took hold of him, brought him to the apostles, and described to them how he had seen the Lord on the road. Imagine that. The first time the apostles met Saul, and you have Barnabas, a devout believer, talking to them about what Saul had seen and the fact that Barnabas believed Paul's accounting of it. Verse 28 says, "And he was with them, moving about freely in Jerusalem, speaking out boldly in the name of the Lord. And he was talking and arguing with the Hellenistic Jews," that is, the Greek Jews, the Roman culture Jews. "But they were attempting to put him to death." So he's wanting to have a dialogue, and they're wanting to kill him. But when the brethren learned of it, it says, they brought him down to Caesarea and sent him away to Tarsus, his hometown. See the map there. So Paul had spent many days in Damascus preaching Christ, and then the Jews tried to kill him. So he goes away and spends 3 years in Arabia and Damascus before returning to Jerusalem. According to the letter that he wrote to the churches in Galatia, chapter 1, verse 16, 3 years he spent. So you put that time frame in with the accounting in Acts, and it kind of makes more sense. And at that time, he goes back to Jerusalem, but he only stays a little over 2 weeks. And the Jews in Jerusalem immediately try to kill him. So he returns to Tarsus, his hometown. And then some years later, Barnabas brings him to Antioch. That's in chapter 11, verse 25. Now, the point of this whole section that Luke is putting on here is because in verse 31 it says, "So the church throughout all Judea and Galilee and Samaria enjoyed peace, being built up and going on in the fear of the Lord, and in the comfort of the Holy Spirit it continued to increase." So, Luke is explaining to Theophilus and whoever else wants to read the letter how this movement, these Christians, as they're called in Antioch, were able to spread so rapidly and so quickly. And he's showing all the people that have gone about the area and how it's spread from Jerusalem, and it's going out in this widening circle. And it's exciting. And all the people are spreading the news because it's just so enrapturing. The Messiah has come, and his message is this, and people are responding to it. Now, thus far, we haven't dealt with Peter and his conversion. Part 2 is really the conversion of some unlikely characters, having gone before: a eunuch, a sorcerer, Simon, and now a violent antagonist, Saul of Tarsus. So Luke is showing these people and showing how the gospel has been sent out to some very unlikely people. Now, in verse 32, he says, "Now as Peter was traveling through all those regions," Peter is traveling, he's not just staying in Jerusalem, he's traveling, "he came down also to the saints who lived at Lydda," or Lod in the Old Testament. "There he found a man named Aeneas who had been bedridden 8 years, for he was paralyzed." Verse 34 says, "Peter said to him, 'Aeneas, Jesus Christ heals you.'" Remember, Jesus Christ is active and alive. Jesus Christ heals you. Peter isn't just saying, "I'm giving Jesus credit for healing you." He's saying, Jesus heals you. It's important that that distinction is made. He said, "Jesus Christ heals you. Get up and make your bed." And immediately he got up. And here's the point. Verse 35, "All who lived at Lydda and Sharon saw him, and they turned to the Lord." So these miracles are always linked in with the spread of the gospel. They're not meant to dazzle or bedazzle the audiences or give the person who is performing the miracle any credit at all. They're simply for the purpose of expanding the gospel. Let's stop and consider this one question. Come back when you've had a chance to discuss it. The next story involves another very unlikely character and a significant turn in the story, at least for Peter. And of course, Peter will have an influence on those in Jerusalem in future chapters. The story is about Peter and Cornelius. And it's a two-part story because Peter has a vision of clean and unclean animals that the Lord once again himself appears in a vision and shows Peter that Peter should not call unclean what God has made clean. Now, he doesn't understand exactly what that means yet. It doesn't mean that he's supposed to go off and start a new diet. But what it does mean is that he is supposed to reconsider what he considers clean and unclean in general. At the same time, Cornelius has been given a vision of his own. Again, here is Jesus acting directly in the story. Jesus appears to Cornelius, he appears to Saul, he appears to Peter, and Jesus is actually healing people himself And he is. So Jesus is alive and active. Now, when Peter goes to Cornelius' house, you must realize it was not right for a Jew to enter the house of a Gentile. It would make them ceremonial unclean. There was a great prejudice against dealing with Gentiles because of this very thing. And Peter actually explains that to them. And then he says, the Lord has taught me that I should not call anybody unclean. So you would think he got the message. You would think that all of them would have the message by now, that the gospel is not just for Jews. Surely the apostles must have understood when Jesus gave them the Great Commission, as we call it, at the end of Matthew, that they were to preach the gospel to all nations. But perhaps it had not yet been revealed to them that the Gentiles were to be received as Gentiles. They seem to have thought that before the Gentiles could be saved and accepted into the household of God as Christians, that they had to first become Jewish proselytes by being circumcised and by keeping all the laws of Moses. You know, there were Jews in all of the nations to which all of these stories are accounted for. And the apostles may have thought that their mission was to those Jews who were scattered from Jerusalem after the stoning of Stephen. In fact, in verse 19 of chapter 10, it says, "So then, those who were scattered because of the persecution that occurred in connection with Stephen made their way to Phoenicia and Cyprus and Antioch, speaking the word to no one except Jews alone." So they might have understood that it was to go to all the nations, but they didn't understand, apparently, that it was to go out to all the Gentiles in every nation. It becomes quite a sticking point for some of them, as we'll see. But God shows them otherwise. Judea, Samaria, and Galilee had all been evangelized at this point, but the time had now come to offer the gospel to the Gentiles. And he begins with Cornelius. Now, Cornelius himself, we know from the scriptures, was an officer of the Roman army stationed in Caesarea, the Roman capital of Palestine. It was also the residence of the Roman governor, and it was the military headquarters of the province. Cornelius himself was the officer in charge of what appears to have been the elite regiment, known as the Italian regiment. It may have been something like the governor's bodyguard detail. He was the officer in charge and might have been one of the best known men among the Roman officials in the whole area. So Cornelius was not a likely candidate for the gospel. He was also a good and devout man. He must have known something of the teachings of the Jews and of the Christians, because Caesarea was Philip's home. Perhaps he had heard Philip preach. But it's through Cornelius, as he prays to the God of the Jews, that Jesus appears and gives him the rest of the story. The other character that appears in the story is Jesus himself. It's Jesus who chose Cornelius to be the first Gentile to whom the gospel door was opened. Jesus himself directs the sequence of events that happen. He told Cornelius to send for Peter. He sends Peter to him. It was a special vision that Jesus gave to Peter of himself so that Peter would actually go there. And it was Jesus himself who put his own seal of approval on the reception of Cornelius into the church. He was the first fruits of the Gentile world. And after this, Peter baptizes Cornelius and the other Gentiles in the group. Now, Cornelius' conversion and that surrounding his household probably would have happened somewhere between 5 and 10 years after the founding of the church in Jerusalem, somewhere around AD 40. And the knowledge of what would have happened in Caesarea, no doubt, gave some impetus to the founding of the church, of the Gentile church in Antioch. But it was hard for some Jews to accept this Also, interesting note, it was from Joppa that God sent Peter to the Gentile Cornelius. And it was the same place in Joppa about 800 years earlier that God had to use a little extra persuasion, let's say, on a Jewish Jonah to get him to go to the Gentile nation of Nineveh. Now let's stop the tape and consider one more question, and then we'll come back and wrap things up. Thank you for your attention today. I hope that this study has encouraged you and made you want to read the scriptures for yourself. I know I was supposed to try to make it through to Antioch today, but we just ran out of time. However, if you would accept this as an assignment, do some reading ahead. Read through chapter 10, 11, and all the way to the first missionary journey of who will become Paul the Apostle. Hope you have a great week. May God bless you and yours. I'll see you next time.